Usually it's the folks of the USA that have bizarre reasons to accept that a god is real, but here's a European fellow that stopped being an atheist because philosophy convinced him that a god is real. Despite not looking like he's been alive for very long, he had a very long journey from atheism to Christianity, and maybe he has the reasons we should all believe in gods. Hello, I'm the Skeptic, the British floating circle that watches people make extraordinary claims, and then I explain why I don't accept what they're saying. The best way to prove a god isn't with actual evidence, but with words and arguments. You know, sounding smart with philosophy. I'm only jealous because I'm a dumb floating circle that doesn't understand anything, other than why I don't accept things. That's where Vico comes in. This young dude spent a long time, I'm actually guessing a few hours considering how old he is, becoming Christian, even though he was once an atheist, and he's here to explain his philosophical journey, which, you never know, may convince you and me that atheism is an incorrect position. However, before finding out how to stop being atheist, if this isn't your first Skeptic video, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell and get more videos like this in your feed. And a super thanks to those that hit super thanks in some recent videos. Paul B, William, Greed is Rage, and Beans Marcus. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe bestows leaves upon you all. More hen. I'm ready for a journey with you, Vico. Let's go.
How could someone who watches Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, who's even debated for atheism, now become a Christian?
I don't know. Maybe they could just stop using their thinking heads and start accepting things for really bad reasons. Or maybe they've discovered absolute proof of a god. Dun dun dun.
Now let me explain and take you through the philosophical journey that made me become a Christian again.
Again? So you started out Christian, stopped accepting Christianity and identified as an atheist, then became a Christian again. I'm going to guess there was a rebellious stage, and that's why you decided to stop accepting Christianity. Maybe to annoy mummy and daddy or something.
Now, quick disclaimer. I don't wish to convert anyone. I simply want to give you some ideas that might raise some thoughts in you.
Same, buddy. I don't want to convert anyone. I just want to give a safe space for non-believers whilst pointing out the obvious silliness to make sure those that don't accept a god realise they're not alone. And it's not weird to not believe in a sky man.
Now it all began when I heard Elon Musk talk about how we could be in a simulation.
I think if we've learned anything, it's to take anything that Muskrat says with a pinch of salt.
How, when eventually we'll be able to create a simulation equally complex to our world, that allows for a simulation to be created within that simulation. Meaning that there could be, in theory, an infinite amount of simulations. And then the question is, what are the chances that we are the first one? And when I heard that, I'm like, well, that's a good point. And what does it mean if we are in a simulation?
So because someone suggested we might be a simulation, you jumped to belief. And what does it mean if we're in a simulation? That the creators of the simulation could interact with the simulation and prove that they exist?
Well, surely that means that we have a creator, right? Now that doesn't not mean that we have some omnipotent creator, some god. It could be an alien, it could be another human that created us. But it means that this idea of a creator ain't so stupid after all.
Oh, no. It is, because there's still no reason to accept that this is a simulation. So starting off with, if this was a simulation, blah, 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 isn't going to get us anywhere. Prove it's a simulation first, then start using that to explain why.
And so when I was thinking about that, I'm like, well, maybe I have to give this another chance. Especially because as an atheist, I realized that, well, atheism leads to nihilism. There is no afterlife, there is nothing after we die. So when we die, there is nothingness. We experience nothing, we remember nothing.
Well, nihilists think that life is meaningless. I do not. As far as I'm aware, this life is all I have. That's pretty meaningful.
Which means that the things that we do don't actually matter. Everything in life will be the same no matter what you did when you die. And so everything in the end is meaningless.
No, because your actions could have consequences for others, so that's stupid.
I was a nihilist, and so I was thinking to myself, well, surely I have to give this at least one more chance. I mean, there's nothing to lose, because even if the current atheist self that I was is correct, and the world is completely nihilistic, then it still doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I believe in a God or don't believe in a God. So surely I should choose the one which gives me the most utility while I'm still alive.
The most utility? You just really overcomplicated Pascal's wager, my friend. So you're picking to follow a God that hasn't been demonstrated to exist and accept that its extremely questionable teachings are the way to go, just in case it exists.
And so I started thinking like, well, I'm looking at all these people and, it doesn't matter what happens. These religious people just say, well, it's God's plan, and then they move on. It's like this superpower that they have, and I'm like, I want that. I want that utility of that belief, and, well, now I gotta go get it.
Now the belief is a superpower that I'm not sure how, but it's less philosophy at the moment and more how it makes you feel. What? Say that instead of making up nonsense. Excelsior!
Because even if I'm right, in the sense that the world is completely nihilistic, then it doesn't matter.
Good thing that's stupid and it isn't then, right?
It's just better if I have that belief in God while I'm still alive. And if I'm correct about God, then surely it matters, and that's a positive thing.
But what if you got the wrong God? I know I'd rather have a 50-50 God or no God than a 1 in a million shot of getting the right one.
So no matter the situation, I should believe in God. And when I realized that, I'm like, okay, now I gotta find a way. I gotta find some arguments for this. Because I have to convince myself. And as we talked about, it was kind of the argument from technology, this idea that we could be in a simulation, that there could be a creator, that opened my eyes. And I'm like, that's a possibility.
That's not what you just said. You said, I need to believe in a God, and now I need to find ways to convince myself that it's true. That could work for anything, like Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe leaf be upon her, except she's the one true cosmic deity that pooped the universe into existence and then find things that confirm she exists. Like rainbows.
So then I do the logical thing, and I start thinking, well, what about the original world? I mean, there has to be at least one original world. It could be us, or it could be some other world.
Or this whole thing may just be a made-up mess.
But how could that original world come into existence? Well, we could explain it with the Big Bang. That may make sense, but why did the Big Bang happen? I mean, we don't have a real answer for that yet. We could in the future, that's of course a possibility, but let's think about it fundamentally. If the modern theories about the Big Bang are true, it means that before the Big Bang, there was nothing.
No, there was at least a singularity, which is a something.
And so, whatever caused something to come out of nothing has to exist. There has to be something which causes something to come out of nothing. Now, there could be a physical law, or there could be some being, a deity. And so I really thought about this, and I'm like, okay, let's just assume that this something that exists came from nothing. What would that require? Surely, if this was some universal constant like gravity or the nuclear forces, we could experience and we could see it constantly.
You're assuming a hell of a lot there, buddy. Why would you even start with an assumption?
We could see constantly things coming out of nothing, but we cannot see that. Like we can constantly observe gravity, we cannot constantly observe something coming out of nothing. So this is not some constant force of the universe that causes this to happen.
How on earth could you ever conclude that? How often do you see singularities bursting under their own condensed fullness and billowing out into the universe?
And if it's not a constant force, then surely that means that there is some intentionality behind it. Because it happened only once, at least to our knowledge.
Did it? How do you know that?
And then I'm thinking like, hey, there's some intentionality in the existence of the universe. Doesn't intentionality in a sense mean there's a mind that somebody chose to do that?
Well, no, you're concluding that there's intentionality because you can't explain something. That's not the same as there actually being intentionality.
Whoa. That could not mean. Now, of course, at this point, I'm thinking like, okay, maybe I'm just so ignorant in physics and science that I should not even do this.
Well, that's probably a fair conclusion.
That I cannot even have this thought. It's illegal or something. And now that we have like the argument from technology, which is that we could be in a simulation and there's a creator.
Saying we could be without actually offering any reason for that position isn't an argument. It's saying something stupid and hoping people go, oh yeah, that sounds about right.
Which, well, from our point of view, can do basically anything because they can change this world however they want, just like we can change the code in Minecraft. And then we have this argument from existence that, well, for something to exist, even the original world, it most likely had some intentionality behind it. And now I'm like, I could have things wrong. I could be that I'm totally clueless and I'm ignorant of something that would totally just absolutely debunk these arguments.
But there's nothing to debunk. You just said, what if this was a simulation? I'm pretty sure I could say, what if it wasn't a simulation? And that just cancels it out.
But this is starting to build enough confidence that I'm like, hey, maybe this atheism thing isn't that great. Maybe it's not the worldview that I should hold. Especially because if the nihilistic atheistic self that I was is correct, then it doesn't even matter what I believe. Because in the end, everything's meaningless. And so, there's basically two options. And now we're going to something similar to like a Pascal's wager. If the atheist nihilist version of me is correct, then it doesn't even matter. I mean, no matter what, I just die and it's all meaningless in the end and so on.
If you think your life is meaningless, that's on you. I have a family that I want to provide the best life for and make a safe space for people who aren't always given the opportunity to be themselves. That's not meaningless.
And it's like, okay, so in that world, if I believe in a God, there's basically no downsides. There might be upsides because it could make me happier. It could give me this superpower of when some bad things happen, I just say God's plan and move on. So even in that world, there might be something positive about a belief in a God.
Saying trust in God's plan isn't a superpower. It's a cop-out. And what on earth makes you happier as a believer? Knowing that you have to spend an eternity telling a being that is a massive butthole that it's amazing? No thanks. What a waste of time.
But if this version of me that believes in a God, is now somehow correct, even though there is no absolute evidence for it yet,
then why the bloody hell do you accept it then?
If this side is correct, then surely it matters. Surely it's an important belief to have. And it gives a lot of good. Because, well, that's your key to heaven, right?
Which version of heaven, though? What if you got the wrong God and you spent all this time saying, I love you, God A, but it was actually God A266T54? That God may be pretty pissed off that you worshipped another incorrect God.
This evidence is starting to stack against this atheist belief. And so I'm thinking like, man, I think I'm gonna lean towards the theistic side. Now, of course, thus far, I've been talking very generally about just a deity and not a specific God, because that's probably even a harder question is, which God is the real God?
I just said that.
And I think that Christianity happens to make the best case for their God to be the correct one. And that's why I'm a Christian. But you know what? The question of which God exists is probably harder than the question of does God exist? And that requires a whole video of its own. But basically now I'm like starting to be like, okay, maybe I should just, believe in a God. And there's some pretty convincing evidence that this could be a possibility of the world, and this belief gives me a lot of utility while I'm still alive. So it's like there seems to be no downside to believing in a God.
Other than accepting that it was once okay to own people as property, forcing gender inequality and giving up your Sundays in bed.
And so I'm like, well, okay, let's go with this. And so I started becoming more theistic, started acting more Christian, if that makes sense. I don't just live like an atheist nihilist who's like, oh, nothing matters. I'm like, okay, you know what? God is watching. God is judging all my actions. I have to not be lazy. I have to work hard. I have to be productive. I have to do the correct things and make God proud.
Wow. Doing things just to make a being that hasn't been demonstrated proud of you is terrible. You're only doing things because you think it might be a ticket to heaven. And out of 8 billion plus people, you think that God is watching you do things to make it proud? Pfft, delusional.
And I'm seeing good results in my life, of course. I'm exercising more, I'm eating a lot healthier, and so on. And I'm like, these are just improving my life. And the reason why I'm doing them is, of course, because they've helped me, but also because I feel like I have a duty to God.
I was £230 in 2012, I started running in 2013 and eventually dropped to £190. I don't believe in a God, so that's not it, buddy.
And after some time, I'm constantly praying and I'm like, God, if you're real, give me this one argument, give me this one absolute proof that you exist, and that's all I need. I think that's the basic thing that everyone prays for. Can you just please show yourself? God did not show himself to me, unfortunately.
So why the bloody hell do you believe in it?
But then after thinking so hard about please give me this absolute knowledge that you exist, I started thinking, well, what is knowledge? Well, how can even get absolute knowledge? Do we even have absolute knowledge of anything? I mean, my nihilist self in the past would have said that there is no absolute knowledge. You can always just say that, well, what if some other possibility? There is no such thing as absolute knowledge. And then I started thinking, well, okay, well, surely there must be something that we cannot doubt. I can doubt my eyes and my empirical data that I'm constantly getting and say that, hey, maybe this is a simulation instead of real life. Maybe this is a hallucination.
Sounds like a you problem, matey.
So we can always, to at least some degree, doubt these things. And then I'm like, well, okay, what is something that is undoubtable, that is true in absolutely every universe?
Every universe? You have proof of a multiverse now?
That can never be doubted. And I'm like, well, logic, right? Logic seems to be something that we cannot doubt. And then I go into the most insane research of my life. What is logic based upon? Surely logic is based upon some foundational truth that cannot never be questioned. And then of course I find out that logic is based on the 3 classical laws of logic. The law of identity, the law of excluded middle, and the law of non-contradiction. And then I'm like, okay, it's based on something. Well, okay, let's, this seems good. We have something that we can't doubt, right? And then I was like, oh wait. Now I have to ask the question, what are the laws of logic based upon?
Yep, that's the face of someone that wants to know where logic comes from.
Oh man. And then I started researching again and I just simply come to the answer that they aren't based upon, in a sense, anything objective. You cannot prove logically the law of identity, the law of excluded middle, or the law of non-contradiction without circular logic. And so I'm like, okay, well, these are some axioms that cannot be proven. And then I'm like, okay. But surely logic is so useful that surely we cannot doubt it, right? But this is philosophy. And in philosophy you can doubt anything. And then I'm like, oh, this is big trouble. I go through this, the definitions, they'll define this way, that's why they're always correct, is because we define them that way. And then the question is, well, why define him that way? Why not have the law of identity be that nothing is identical with itself?
Because you don't say, this is the law, and then everything conforms. You notice something that happens and explain it, and then maybe call it a law.
And in the end, it all comes down to, well, we have an intuition that, I'm identical with me.
I am me. I'm not identical with me.
And this camera is identical with this camera. Like, we have a very strong intuition for that. And now that we have a very strong intuition for that, we just kind of take it for granted. And this is kind of like the big philosophical finding that I had. It's like, wait, all of our knowledge is at its core based on intuition. There is no absolute knowledge, there is simply very strong intuitions that form the basis of logic and of our ideas and our experiences, and we trust that intuition, and that's why we can have knowledge built upon this foundation. And now it kind of leaves you with two choices. Either you say that, well, we cannot trust our intuition, which would mean that there is no logic, because even logic relies on intuition.
But intuition can be confused and not get things right, especially thanks to our own biases. So perhaps not, huh?
And if we have no logic, then surely we have nothing else, no other knowledge either. Well, the only knowledge we have is that I know nothing, Socrates. And so that's a fair position that you can take. And that's basically the position that my nihilist self took. But then I was like, man, but that belief gives me no utility. And I want utility from my beliefs while I'm still alive. And so the only way that I can get utility from any belief is that if I can even hold the belief. And that requires that I trust my intuition.
Which can be wrong.
At least to the degree that I can create a foundation for then building upon knowledge and then testing other intuitions. And if we are to accept intuition as trustable, then doesn't that mean that the intuition that humans have for God makes God as real as logic? So if you are to have intuition for logic and the laws of logic, and you're like, okay, well, we can trust this intuition, and therefore logic is a good tool that we can use, and we should believe that logic is true, surely we have this similar intuition that we have that, there might be a creator, must be true as well then.
So because folks have intuition, which could be wrong, there must be a God. That's how you got here. Oh, right. I could use intuition to prove that Lisa the rainbow giraffe, leave me upon her, ate all the potential gods before pooping the universe into existence, which means your God can't exist. See how silly that sounds?
And that was the argument from intuition. It truly, it blew my mind. I'm like, wait, so if everything is based on intuition, and if we are to trust this intuition, then that means that God is true. If we are to not trust in this intuition, then we have nothing.
Not true. You just have bad intuition.
And so I'm just thinking like, damn, surely I must hold, if I want to be logically consistent, and if I want utility from my beliefs, surely believing in a God is the correct thing to do. And so that's why I chose to believe in a God. That's what convinced me, like, you know what, this belief in a God is absolutely something that we should have.
But you chose to believe. You weren't convinced. You were just playing a game of cover my ass. You don't really have proof of the God, or at least it sounds that way.
Or at least I should have, because I get so much utility from such a belief. And now, of course, the hard question is, well, which God is correct? Which God should I believe in? And it's like, well, once again, that might require a whole video of its own. But so far, I would say the Christians have made the best case for their God being the correct one.
How? Where?
And I think, for example, the Trinity makes a lot of sense, because if there is an all-powerful God, why should God be limited to one person? One God in three people? That's surely something we could expect from an all-powerful being. They can just do whatever they want.
They just can't demonstrate they exist, apparently. So this was less a philosophical journey and more of you saying, I better believe just in case, despite there not being sufficient evidence for any gods. Making up scenarios and then justifying the scenario after you've decided it's a thing. What a terrible way to prove something. I'm going to say that this European doesn't have any great reason to believe in a god. But maybe you think he does. Let me know in the section below. I'm going to skeptic this as some more silly arguments. A big thank you to this month's top level ticks on Patreon. Dark Ether Piao, Tamo, The Barely Bearable Atheist, George, Godless Granny, Addy Rockhart, The Enixes, Jakari, Elizabeth, Whiskey Tech Fred, and Rick, as well as all the $3 base ticks. You can become a supporter on Patreon too at patreon.com/theskeptic. The link is in the description, along with links to all my other socials. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, the Skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically, and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.